The girl melts when exposed to high temperatures. When the temperature drops too low at night, her entire body freezes. Because she is a wax person, only at dawn and dusk can she and her father come out to move around. Mary's mother passed away after going out to pick mushrooms at 3 p.m., being roasted alive by the sun. Since then, Mary's father has forbidden her to go out during the day. But even so, mischievous Mary often sneaks out behind her father's back, this time, to watch the guardian succession ceremony. She carefully devised an escape plan. She set up mirrors in her room in advance. As soon as the sun appeared, the sunlight would reflect onto her, reviving her frozen body from the night. While her father was still unfrozen, she ran into the shadows of the forest ahead of time. As the sun and moon rose simultaneously, the scene was split into two parts by light and shadow. Mary stood at the junction of the two, witnessing the grand ceremony. Mary's planet was originally a world without light, until a mighty warrior appeared, who caught the sun with an iron chain. Another warrior brought the moon back from the dream world. The two warriors each built a moving temple, dragging the sun and moon forward every day. Thus, day and night alternated. Later, people began to call the warriors who guarded the sun and the moon guardians, and they maintained the order of the world. The guardians passed down their roles from generation to generation. When the life of the current guardian was coming to an end, they would choose a new successor to take their place. The current guardian's apprentices, Fire King and Night King, were the top candidates. Fire King was a strong stone person, overflowing with confidence, and never missed an opportunity to show off his charm in front of women. Night King, on the other hand, was much more low-key, but also confident that he would become the next guardian. Mary defied her father's orders to watch the ceremony, just to see Fire King's performance in person. As the cheers grew louder, the current sun guardian shakily walked out. He raised the mirror in his hand, and a beam of light reflected onto Fire King. This meant the sun had acknowledged Fire King as the new guardian. However, Night King encountered trouble. The spirit beast representing the moon didn't choose him. Instead, it selected the night elf, Xiaolan, hidden in the bushes. The scene erupted in surprise, but the guardians decided to respect the moon's choice, and announced Xiaolan as the new guardian. Night King was clearly unhappy, but now the decision was made, and he could only storm off in anger. This gave the magma monster lurking underground a chance to strike. To obtain the long-desired sun, he sent out the captivating glow snake to find the dissatisfied Night King and sow seeds of discord. In this way, the Night King was successfully corrupted, deciding to team up with the lava monster to reclaim the sun and moon from the successor. Meanwhile, the old guardian was showing little Lon around the moon temple. At the center of the temple stood a glowing divine tree, on which lived a group of white spiders. The threads they wove connected to the moon. The guardian controlled the temple's movement by strumming these threads, guiding the temple to drag the moon along. In addition, the old guardian told little Lon the origin of the moon. It was then that little Lon learned the moon came from the dream world. After being carved by the first guardian, it was brought into this world through the dream gate in the temple. After sharing this, the old guardian stepped outside the temple. His body began to change, eventually turning into a tall moon tree. Little Lon then realized this was the final resting place of the guardians. At the end of each guardian's life, they became a moon tree, continuing their guardianship. Although the old guardian had found peace, he left the inexperienced little Lon in a panic. He had intended to control the temple's movement, but his lack of experience caused it to run amok. Little Lon tried to fix things. Ignoring the little spider's warnings, she began to strum the threads randomly. This turned out to be a disaster. The temple completely lost control, deviating from its course and causing massive damage to the ground. What was worse, the threads that dragged the moon began to break from repeated friction. As the moon teetered dangerously, little Lon pulled desperately, trying to save the erratic moon. But in the end, the moon flew away as the thread snapped. The temple collapsed instantly, losing its divine power. On the other side, the Flame King, who was controlling the sun, happened to witness the scene. As he was wondering what was going on, he heard the Night King's voice. The Night King urged him to punish little Lon. The Flame King thought for a moment and agreed. Since the other party caused such a big mess on his first day, he couldn't let him off. So, despite the Stone Man's objections, he left the Sun Temple without permission. What he didn't know was, as soon as he left, two little demons from the lava monster's minions snuck into the temple, secretly taking the sun.
Bling, j'ai l'impression que c'est moi qui porte tout le machin. Ah oui, pourtant je suis en train de pousser, Mox. Je suis à fond.
All of this was seen by Mary, who was hiding nearby. To reclaim the moon, Lon had a sudden stroke of genius. He hurled a tiny spider toward the moon with all his might. As soon as the spider touched the moon, it immediately spun its silk around it several times. Then, it tugged on the silk to signal Lon below. Just like that, Lon retrieved the moon without a hitch, but he had no idea how to hang it back in the sky. At that moment, the Flame King suddenly appeared. Facing his interrogation, Lon desperately tried to cover up his mistake. Just then, Mary's voice rang out from outside the temple. She told the Flame King that the sun had been stolen. The Flame King was shocked and rushed back to check, but it was too late. All that remained was the collapsed temple, and the sky growing darker in the distance. The magma monster, who had stolen the sun, immediately extinguished its flames, and ordered two little demons to guard it, until it was completely snuffed out. Lan's negligence left the Flame King speechless. He could no longer tolerate it, snatching the moon from Lan's hands, and handing it over to the Night King for safekeeping. Devastated, Lan ran into the nearby forest. When he returned to his tribe, he found it in ruins. The villagers hurled insults at him, and even his father was deeply disappointed. It was then that Lan finally realized his mistake. He swore to set everything everything right. Meanwhile, the Flame King set out to retrieve the sun. Due to the Candle People's nature, Mary could only stay unfrozen by remaining near him. After much pleading, the Flame King finally agreed to take her along. But Mary soon regretted it. The Flame King was rough and had no sense of gentleness. As they argued over the route, Lon caught up to them. He had decided to help find the sun. The Flame King was reluctant at first, but since he had a terrible sense of direction, he had no choice but to accept. Meanwhile, the Night King, now in possession of the moon, soon realized that without the sun, the moon was losing its power. Not only could it no longer rise, but it was also shrinking rapidly, growing dim and lifeless. As the moon vanished completely, the glowing plants on the ground withered at an alarming rate. The temple lost control, its massive form turning into a rampaging beast. The world plunged into chaos. Lon and his companions noticed the drastic changes around them, so they quickened their pace. Following the ancient texts, they arrived at a massive abyss leading to the Earth's core. Mary hesitated. The freezing waters would turn her body into solid ice in an instant, and one wrong move could shatter her completely. Lon reassured her, promising to get her to the bottom safely, and so, he carried the frozen Mary on his back, and followed the Flame King into the abyss. On their way down, they were attacked by a giant octopus. Just then, a bright light appeared, saving them from danger. To their surprise, their savior was none other than the old turtle, the former guardian of the moon. After a brief conversation, they realized they had taken the wrong path. The abyss couldn't lead them to the Earth's core at all. Under the old turtle's guidance, they left the abyss and arrived at the real entrance to the underground. Seeing Mary still frozen solid, the old turtle placed a tentacle on her, restoring her to normal.
C'est comme ça que tu remercies ton sauveur?
The three of them learned the origin of the magma monster from the old tortoise. He had once been a powerful sun guardian, but he was tempted by the evil serpent and grew evil desires. He wanted to claim the sun for himself. The previous sun guardian stopped him. With one blow he sent him deep underground. This solved the crisis. At that time the old tortoise however was stripped of his guardian status for showing cowardice before the battle. He was exiled to the deep pool, so when Mary asked him about it he could only fake his anger and walk away. The three left behind continued their journey. As they climbed down toward the deep pit, Xiaolon suddenly saw the moon temple running wild.
Oh non! Le temple est devenu fou! Il faut que je...
They decided to split up. Yanwang continued toward the underground to find the sun. Xiaolon took Mary to calm the temple. He climbed to the highest point of the temple. Facing the out-of-control temple, Xiaolon discovered that the glowing powder on his arm had magical powers. It seemed to be able to soothe the temple's spirit. He immediately waved his arm and released more glow powder. After calming the temple, Xiaolon rushed inside. He woke up the sleeping knight. When he learned that the moon was dead, Xiaolon did not give up. He decided to follow in the footsteps of the first guardian, to go to the dream world and bring back a new moon. Mary decided to go with him. They opened the dream gate on the floor and jumped in without hesitation. As soon as they entered the dream world, they were surrounded by nightmares. Xiaolon waved his glow powder, and to his surprise the glow powder dispelled the nightmares. Seeing this, he released more glow powder. Soon all the nightmares were gone. They found a small spider holding a huge moonstone. Using the tools left by his predecessors, Xiaolon climbed up to the moon and carved out a brand new moon. After enduring many hardships, Xiaolon and Mary's relationship grew rapidly. They danced in the dream world. Just as they were about to kiss, a powerful force suddenly pulled them back. It was the Night King who had opened the dream gate. He unknowingly ruined their moment. When the Night King saw Xiaolon had really brought back the moon, though jealous, he finally acknowledged Xiaolon as a guardian. Now that the moon was found, it still couldn't shine without the sun. To make the moon shine again, they decided to head to the Earth's core to meet Yanwang. Meanwhile, Yanwang had reached the underground but was surrounded by countless evil snakes. He was on the verge of being completely corrupted. At the critical moment, the old tortoise appeared just in time. He wrapped himself around Yanwang's body. Having escaped once, this time he did not want to run away. He sacrificed his life to restore Yanwang's sanity. The old tortoise soon ran out of energy and passed away. At this moment, Xiaolon and Mary arrived. There was no time to grieve, so they immediately continued their search for the sun. By now the magma monster had learned of their arrival. He came out personally, blocking their path with his minions. Yanwang decided to stay behind and fight the magma monster alone, but the gap in their strength was too great. Yanwang was knocked down in just a few moves. Xiaolon was also blocked by the little demon. Only Mary reached the extinguished sun. Seeing her friends in danger, the only way to turn things around was to wake the sun. Without hesitation, she began blowing at the sun. The moment she blew, the intense heat started melting her body, but she didn't stop. Finally the sun ignited and shone brightly. When Xiaolon rushed over, Mary was already on the brink of death, but she had no regrets. In her final moment, she encouraged Xiaolon, believing that he would definitely defeat the magma monster. Though Xiaolon was heartbroken, Mary closed her eyes forever. Before Xiaolon could mourn, the magma monster suddenly appeared behind him. He raised his foot to crush Xiaolon. Luckily Yanwang arrived just in time. He used his body to create a protective space. With the sun rising, the moon followed. A surge of power flowed into the weakened bodies of the two. With immense strength, Yan Wang flipped the magma monster to the ground. At the same time, Xiaolan dragged the magma monster into the dream world. In the dream world, Xiaolan was the master. He defeated the magma monster step by step. From the magma monster's body, he pulled out a gigantic evil snake. The snake tried to resist, but Xiaolan used magic to shrink it to a mini version. It was because of this evil snake that the magma monster had become what he was. After Xiaolan dispelled the snake's dark power, the magma monster returned to his true self. At the same time, Xiaolan dragged the magma monster into the dream world. In the dream world, Xiaolan was the master. He defeated the magma monster step by step. From the magma monster's body, he pulled out a gigantic evil snake. The snake tried to resist, but Xiaolan used magic to shrink it to a mini version. It was because of this evil snake that the magma monster had become what he was. After Xiaolan dispelled the snake's dark power, the magma monster returned to his true self. He smiled and thanked Xiaolan for saving him. Then he turned into a stone. What was once a hellish place transformed into a world full of birds and flowers. After solving all the crises, Xiaolan returned to the surface with Mary's body. He carefully restored her body to its original form. No matter how perfectly he molded her, Mary would never wake up. Xiaolan broke off a piece of the moon, placed it in Mary's palm, hoping it would always be with her. Then he left in solitude. As the sun and moon were returned to the sky, the planet regained its vitality. At that moment, a miracle happened. Under the sun and moon's gentle care, Mary came back to life. She saw the glowing moon fragment in her hand, and knew that Xiaolan had one. Without a second thought, she ran towards the night. Now she was no longer afraid of the sun's heat. She could bask in the sunlight freely. Seeing Mary rise from the dead, Yan Wan laughed joyfully. Mary reached the boundary between day and night, waiting for Xiaolan. Xiaolan soon found her. The two young lovers who had admired each other from afar finally came together as they had always wished.